I'm Ashton Addison from the Crypto Coin Show. Today on Blockchain Interviews, we have Tom Trowbridge, CEO of Fluence. Tom, welcome to the show, and thanks for taking the time.
Great. Thank you for having me, Addison. Happy to be here.
You're very welcome. Excited to dive into LLMs, blockchain decentralization, not always on chain, which I think is an interesting perspective that many also forget about, and what Fluence is working on and the lead up to the mainnet as well. I would love to start off our conversation by, first of all, hearing a little bit about yourself, your background leading up to Fluence, what got you so interested in this, and then we'll dive into everything Fluence.
Certainly. So before Fluence, I helped found a L1 called Hedera Hashgraph. And I had joined Manson Lehman pretty much when it was a white paper, and was, a key part of building the team, raising the money, getting the first council members, and helped kind of get everything going from the white paper to the launch. And that was a, intensive multi-year kind of baptism by fire into the whole kind of blockchain decentralized, world and ecosystem. So it was a terrific learning experience. It gave me it also was a great technical education, because both Dr. Lehman Barrett and Mance Harmon were incredibly credentialed and impressive technologists and frankly scientists. And so I learned a terrific amount about the whole industry through that lens, which was interesting. And then when I left, Hedera, there was really important lessons I gained from that. And, the technical fundamentals being solid is number one. And so that was kind of key point. The other was not overpromising and kind of delivering what you said you were going to deliver, especially in this industry, I think is really important. And some people kind of take that for granted, but I don't think you can here. And then the other, and this is something I think I wanted to improve on from the Hedera experience, was make sure you are very crypto native and very dialed into that community, because it makes an enormous difference in terms of the time and attention that people pay on your project. Mm-hmm. And so Fluence had those three characteristics and a lot more. But those were kind of some kind of experiences and lessons I took from that.
Wow, very cool. And I do love Hedera. I'm actually working with some projects on the Hedera ecosystem still. So it's really great to hear that you were part of the conception of it. So that's very cool. And now moving into Fluence, how exactly is that different? And what exactly is Fluence working on in the industry right now?
Well, Fluence, we call Fluence Cloudless Computing Network. And so, if you take a step back, we realize that computing started off in people's homes and people's offices. And then over a 20-year period, people were brought onto the cloud. And companies and people have moved to the cloud. You use your Gmail, that's happening in the cloud. Your, Netflix stuff is delivered from the cloud. Like everything has moved a lot, not everything, but a lot has moved to the cloud. Mm-hmm. And that has been a cost savings and probably been a security enhancement given the profiles of hosting most of these applications and servers in-house. But that has come at a cost, a economic cost, a centralization cost, a censorship cost, and a resilience cost. And so you now are in a world of several companies that basically own the cloud. Mm-hmm. And so we think, and they're also terrifically profitable companies, obviously, as well. And they provide a valuable service. So that's not you'd expect nothing else. But then internet itself, the economics lead to central. And so, because benefits of scale are rewarded. And so we think we've gone from the in-house servers to the cloud, but the next and final iteration is cloudless. And what that means is a network that is open and isn't constrained to any one provider, where your application lives wherever somebody will host it and uses whatever open source or frankly closed source components that anyone will host. And if the host it's on has an outage or goes down, it can go somewhere else. If you decide you want to leave that host, you can go leave that host immediately. You don't need to unwind, and you don't need to worry about being kicked off for a violation of an 80-page term of service that is arbitrarily interpreted differently one day for a particular reason. So that's the iteration. And Fluence is building is this cloudless computing network and stack. And that is what we're been building for years and are very close to launching.
Wow, very cool. And yeah, I feel like so many people use the cloud right now, and they don't really know how it works or where their files are, who's actually controlling them. They might know, yeah, it's somebody else's server computer, but I feel like it's they don't know how good it could be because the infrastructure hasn't really got there yet. I feel like eventually there will be the extinction of the cloud as we know it, where there's just that handful of companies that are controlling it, and it will be a decentralized cloud, and probably people will be able to capture some of those rewards that are so centralized right now.
Well, I mean, listen, there's a whole bunch of elements that you mentioned there that I agree with, and we should spend a minute of time on. I mean, first, people use the best technology. You don't know and care how it works because it just works, right? You and I don't know the details of the iPhone, but we're happy it works the way it does. Cloud, you don't need to know how it all works. But the problem is that the larger companies get, the more intertwined they become with governments. And this goes back to the railroads. I mean, it's not any company's fault. It just happens that is the case. And so you end up having kind of a couple things happen, but you have censorship potential, and that's one thing. But you also, the bigger you get, the fewer other options there are, you end up with sort of oligopolistic pricing, which is sort of similar to monopolist pricing. We have very high margins. You see these companies with massive margins, and customers are, use it, they're happy, but they're locked in. And if you want to leave, it's a little complicated. And the other point is that they have prevented the an open architecture that would drive more innovation. And so you even look at the application layer, where you had companies like Twitter or Facebook that used to have open integrations, and those are now were cut off and gone. And so we see a world where people build applications that are open and where integrations are easy and cannot be disabled. And so I think there's a whole generation of open applications which will build on an open cloudless stack that leads to kind of an innovation acceleration. And so on the one hand, the cloudless stack helps because it saves cost, it reduces lock-in, it has all these other benefits. It also has verifiability. Because you're using blockchain, it's not on-chain, but because blockchain is part of the stack, you can validate and verify that computation was performed, which you can't do in a cloud stack. A company can certify it, and that's useful, but it's very different than actually having a cryptographic proof that something happened. So there's benefits to the kind of infrastructure layer, if you will, and then there's benefits to the application layer of where you can have open applications that share data and users in a way that can't be disabled or cut off. And I am a believer that is going to lead to a terrific amount of innovation that we sort of have a difficult time imagining.
Now, it's very exciting, and thank you for those insights, Tom. Now, with the new version of like the cloudless, more decentralized computing network, I've seen solutions pop up, but because of the network effect of things like Gmail or Google Drive and these storages, people are so familiar with that, and also they've refined the user interface, for grandma, and everyone's able to use it. I feel like you have to build a product in Web3 that's very, as you said, you don't need to know the inner workings in the back, and it also needs to be very easy and user friendly to adopt. And of course, it's one thing for somebody who's hosting an application; they probably have more technical expertise to host their app or website. But when you want to do personal file storage or things that people have no technical background, how can you lower the barriers to entry on a cloudless, decentralized computing network to allow for people to adopt it quickly and transition from those cloud networks that have all those issues, but people are sort of stuck because they don't want to change because they don't want to learn anything new?
I think we have to separate two elements, which is the infrastructure element from the application element. And so we are primarily targeting the infrastructure layer, which is, in your example, would be the developers of the products that would compete with, like, say, the Google applications you mentioned. All right. So, but what we're doing is our objective is to make the building of those applications so simple and to commoditize the backends to such a degree that instead of 50 to 60% of developer resources spent building backends, 20% is or 10% is. So you can have 80% focused on the front end, on the user experience, on the user interface. And so we won't be building and working on the applications you're referring to, but our view is that the simplification for developers that we will enable will facilitate more investment in the front end and will also drive more people into the ecosystem to compete to build better products. Yeah. So that's where our role in that is.
Mm-hmm. No, that's a great point. And, I'm not a developer myself, but I've worked on applications. I've used the Amazon Web Services backend, and it is ridiculous how, you almost need to take a 4-year degree to figure out how many functions they have and all these different functions, and they suck you in that. It's like, I spent years trying to close my account, but there's 100 different things, and it's very complex. I feel like it could definitely be simplified, and also it could definitely be cheaper if we had more decentralized networks.
Yeah, I mean, it will definitely be cheaper. I mean, to give you a sense, and here's another kind of misconception it's important to clear up. When people think of decentralized networks, or they think of, decentralized storage or compute, sometimes the default is to think of people using their laptops or their phones. Mm-hmm. We are running in kind of tier 1 data centers where there's excess compute capacity. Mm-hmm. So, we toured a data center in Las Vegas about 4 months ago, where Netflix is hosted, a whole number of well-known companies are hosted. And so I think that's kind of one misconception that I want to clear, is that this decentralization does not sacrifice the institutional quality and resilience that I think is required these days. Mm-hmm. So that is that's kind of an important point.
Yeah, no, it's great to know, because especially with the quality of the apps and the amount of traffic that's coming in, you're going to need things that are going to be able to compete with the warehouse level of computing power.
Well, exactly. Sorry, and that was my other thing. I forgot the train of thought, which was also price. And so you just have to look and see what the margins are of the cloud providers to see the incredible opportunity there. Mm-hmm. And so when you have racks that are unused in a data center, your marginal cost is pretty much the electricity you're using, and maybe some depreciation as well, right? So there is a terrific amount of margin potential that goes to the customer when you're able to use these. And the key thing is about Fluence is that if you went to a data center and said, I want these, 1,000 servers and I want them for 2 years, you pay a reasonable amount to rent them. But if you said, you can give them to me for a week at a time, you will pay a dramatically lower price for a week-to-week contract. And the reason why it doesn't matter for Fluence is because it's an open network. If they decide to go offline, the applications move automatically to a different provider. And so what that does is it commoditizes that compute because it can go anywhere, which leaves those providers with no pricing power and also allows them to monetize at the same time. They can monetize in small amounts their excess capacity without signing up for a long-term contract at a price that they may find some customer willing to pay more than. So you have two benefits that an open protocol has a sort of compelling rationale for why the pricing is significantly lower than a centralized provider that has to invest in those servers, buy them, hold them for a long period of time, or else rent them from somebody else.
No, that's a really great point, Tom, because that's how part of the way that they have traditionally sort of sucked you in that, lock people in for longer term contracts to give them a bit of a discount on pricing, and other smaller alternatives would cost more, and then you're sort of stuck. And then once you've built your application there, the migration process of something different is like, it's almost not worth your time. You're, even if new alternatives come out that are cheaper in the future, you're sort of stuck with your application because you don't want to pay to migrate or learn new technology.
Yeah, definitely.
So now with the computing network, do I have it right that there's blockchain involved, but it's not fully on the blockchain? It's sort of there's Web 2 use cases and Web 2 technology as well as Web 3?
Yeah, so the way Fluence is a off-chain compute network. And so the way to think about that is to take a step back and realize that the decentralization way predated the blockchain. And, mentioned that Napster was the first decentralized application at scale. And this may surprise people, but, what do you think Napster's users were at peak? Do you know?
Maybe a few millions?
80 million. 80 million, right? And so here we're clawing for thousands or tens of thousands of users or a million users for certain blockchains. And here Napster, 10 years before Bitcoin, had 80 million users at peak. So that shows product market fit for decentralization. And so that is, obviously had some material issues, but the point is that our solution is off chain because there is 99% of the web is non-deterministic compute, which means it will not work via the smart contract. So smart contract compute is fully decentralized for sure on Ethereum, no argument there. And that has terrific use cases for primarily financial applications. Great. But tons of other applications, like you're not going to have an Uber figure out the right route for you to take via smart contracts. It's just not going to work. And so you need to have non-deterministic compute. So Fluence compute is off-chain, like Filecoin storage is off-chain, but it's validated, verified, rewarded, and incented on-chain. And so we use blockchain where, to maximize its strengths. We don't figure in blockchain and force a use case into it.
No, I think that's a good way of going about it, because sometimes, at the current state of where blockchain is, it's more efficient, obviously, and there's a reason that you guys are just doing the verifying and part of it on chain. But there's a reason that the internet has been working so well for the last 20 years without blockchain as well. There's still a lot of good things about it.
Not just the internet. Internet for sure, but just computation is not all. It cannot all be done in a deterministic manner, and that is, I think, the most important piece of it. And so, you kind of implied, what use cases are out there, and so. The other important thing about Fluence is its CPUs, which are central processing units, which are, again, 98% or whatever it is of the web. When people talk about AI, everyone talks about GPUs, and you'll see a lot of GPU networks spring up of people that want to train artificial intelligence, AI, LLM, learning language models, and that is a huge piece, and we're very excited about that. And the technology we're building on Fluence is relevant for that. In the next phase, but we're focused on CPUs, and CPUs are relevant in two ways to AI. One is that you need to clean the data before it gets into the model, and to clean the data, you need CPUs. That's more the generalized compute. It's not the GPU side. And then Fluence is also relevant because you want to be able to prove that your model was trained on particular data set. And you've seen the New York Times sue OpenAI claiming copyright infringement because they claim that OpenAI trained on New York Times. Maybe it did, maybe it didn't. I don't know. But I can promise you that if you're building an LLM now, you're going to be worried about copyright infringement and lawsuit risk. And so you're going to be able to provably validate the data or provably demonstrate what your model was trained on. And that Fluence is capable of that as well. And the last piece is then once you have this model, I think it's important that models run in a decentralized way so they're less subject to manipulation and to opaque manipulation. And so you've already seen ChatGPT, start to have, let's just say questionable answers. Can carbon, give me 5 reasons why carbon is good for the human race. You may not get the answer you want. There's a whole number of those. What will it say about, I don't know, Pakistan versus India? I don't know, but they're centralized companies are going to come under a lot of pressure to generate specific answers or forced answers in models depending on where they are, and that is going to universally undermine credibility. And so a decentralized model will certainly have its failures, but if it's trained in an open, transparent way, verifiably trained on certain data, then and the answers are provably generated from that data set, you at least can't claim it was manipulated. And I think that will lead to those models will be the most trusted models eventually. And I give the obvious example here is people say, well, OpenAI has, 10 billion from Microsoft and it's an enormous company. How can anyone compete with it? But you think about Linux that had, I don't know, Microsoft had a 10-year head start, I'm not even sure, and pretty much unlimited resources. And Linux, just through the open, the global developer community, has become the default standard for operating systems. And so I think we have a model there to show what open source can do, the power of it. And I think that's going to be applicable here but it also has to be run on these open systems in order to help prevent manipulation down the road once it's complete.
Yeah, no, that's a great and very important point, Tom, because people are starting to use ChatGPT more and more every day, and you have to not just rely on the answer it gives as the absolute truth. I feel like from the first version of ChatGPT that came out, you could ask the same question to it now, and the answer is probably different, whether they've updated their algorithm with new information or just new bias. It's hard to tell where the data sets are and what's the bias, whether it's about climate change, countries, political things.
100%.
Yeah, so I feel like decentralized computing networks are definitely going to play a role in that.
Actually, and just that point, as they become viewed, more and more used, they become inevitably viewed as somewhat of a source of truth, the way Google does, except instead of Google giving you links, it's giving you an answer, right? So that is going to make governments in particular super focused on it. You ask a question, for example, imagine during COVID asking, should I wear a mask? You're telling me that the government isn't going to care what that answer is, right? And when that answer is right. So that's just one example, whether wearing a mask makes sense or not, just as an example of the type of very specific question for which there aren't links, there's not data, it's just an answer. And I think you will see that more and more focus on that going forward.
Yeah, no, it's a great point. So now with more of a decentralized LLM or open source ChatGPT competitors, how does that work where they go to Fluence, for example, as an open network? They could host the application and the data set's public, or how would that work?
A couple different ways. So first, the data, data could be clean on Fluence. They come to Fluence, they ask us, or they don't ask us, but they go on the to our protocol and upload a lot of data and basically find hosts that are willing to for a certain whatever price it is, clean that data and make it consistent. Then they would train that data, but that data training on a model would be GPU based, but not on Fluence, at least not in this iteration of Fluence. Fluence will be good for training, will be GPU, let's say, compatible in version 2, which is probably about a year-ish away. I'm not sure exactly, but everything we're building is GPU compatible. We just started this before GPUs were as relevant. And then they can also then come back and say, okay, we have this model. Can you validate it was trained on the correct data and prove that? And then ask hosts who will host this data and then run and then pay to run queries on this data. And so it's basically the running of the model. It's the computation, the querying of that model that hosts on Fluence are suitable to do. And that is the important part. And this is another nuance to what decentralization means. Decentralization doesn't mean I have 5 providers and I pick one. And there's some people in the ecosystem that do that. Like I can do that with my web browser. What decentralization means is I pick, or the algorithm, the network, or me pick some provider, but if that provider goes down, the application automatically fails over to another provider without having to re-provision it. And so decentralization means effectively self-healing. It means resilience. And that's the important piece here, because if you just have to go and keep re-provisioning, it's less usable, it's less user-friendly, and it's there are barriers to the to using and adopting it.
Mm-hmm. Oh, well, I'm very looking forward to trying some of those competitors, and it's even ChatGPT is so new and it's growing so quickly. I feel like the decentralized competitors and hopefully more competition in general will be able to be spun up quickly and compete, head to head with some of the more centralized LLM systems.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's going to happen. It's all in progress right now.
Mm-hmm. So now about Fluence specifically, you mentioned there about version 2. I want to roll that back to sort of the present day and what's coming up in the near future, the coming months here. I understand that the mainnet launch is coming soon. Can you talk about where exactly you're at and what does the mainnet launch mean and what will happen at that point?
Yeah, mainnet launch we're scheduling for ETH Denver on February 27th. So we're going to do a IRL in real life event at ETH Denver. Very excited about it, and that means that we'll have a network usable, stable enough for people to use. It also means, and this is relevant, that we will launch the Fluence token, and the Fluence token is critical because we have to pay people to provide their compute to the network, and so just like Filecoin offers fill rewards for the storage providers, SPs they call them, we provide the FLT reward to providers who offer their compute to the network. And then as more and more useful compute enters the network, that useful compute pays fiat, I mean in stable coin, but denominated in fiat prices to the providers, who then take that revenue as opposed to the FLT reward. And so our view here is we want to make sure that providers are compensated fairly for their services and have downside protection. So we're pricing this in a fiat way as well, but also benefit from the upside as the use of the network grows. And as we hope the amount of locked Fluence increases significantly as well.
Mm-hmm. Wow, very exciting. That's right around the corner. What is the best way for people to follow along with those updates? And if they can't make it to ETH Denver specifically, is there an online community or the updates and how we can follow along with the mainnet launch?
Yeah, I mean, listen, I think first I would certainly go, our website is fluence.network. Fluence_project is our Twitter, and I think that's probably the easiest way to follow us. We're also Fluence Network on Telegram as well, but I think that on the Twitter is probably the fastest, easiest way to stay in touch with us.
Amazing. I'll put those links in the show notes below. Appreciate your insights into all of computing and blockchain, Tom. It's a very interesting discussion. I'm looking forward to the mainnet launch, and we should definitely follow up in the near future after that.
Great. Well, thank you so much. Really appreciate it, and look forward to coming back. Thank you again, Ashton.